My name is Camille Turner, I'm 45 years old, and for most of my life, I wore a uniform. 22 years in the US. Navy taught me two things: how to stay calm in chaos, and how to keep my mouth shut when everyone else wants the last word. These days, I live a quieter kind of life in San Diego. Small apartment, one bedroom, nothing fancy. I can see the harbor from my window if I lean just right. Every morning, I make black coffee, open the blinds, and let the ocean remind me that not every battle needs noise. Most people who meet me assume I'm just another single woman getting by. I drive a 10-year-old Jeep, shop with coupons, and rent instead of own. I like it that way. After years of dealing with orders, discipline, and men who thought women in uniform didn't belong, I earned the right to live in peace. I still keep my medals in a box in the closet out of sight, not out of pride. I work part-time as a consultant for Aegis Security, a private defense firm that contracts with the Navy. It's enough to pay the bills and keep my mind sharp. I don't advertise what I do. Most people hear consultant and picture PowerPoints, not clearance-level strategy sessions with military brass, which suits me perfectly. My sister, Harper Lewis, lives a few states away in Dallas. She's 3 years older, married, and runs a real estate firm that's obsessed with luxury homes, wine tastings, and making sure everyone knows how well she's doing. Growing up, Harper was the pretty one, the talker, the one who knew how to charm teachers. I was the quiet kid who joined ROTC and could fix a flat tire before high school. We loved each other, in theory, but our worlds split early. She married rich. I joined the Navy. You can guess which one got more applause at family reunions. We haven't been close in years. I call on birthdays, she texts on holidays, and that's about it. I've learned to accept it. Families like ours have a strange way of confusing love with comparison. She measures life in status. I measure it in silence. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code was Dallas. I almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was too familiar to ignore. Camille? It was Harper. Still sounded like she was smiling through lipstick. Well, this is a surprise, I said. Don't start. I was going to call you anyway. That's a first. She laughed the way people do when they don't like being caught. Listen, I have some news. Sophie, my daughter is getting engaged. We're hosting an engagement party at the Four Seasons next month. You have to come. It's time you met the whole family. I hadn't seen Sophie in over a decade. The last time was when she still thought I was cool because I could shoot straight and drive a Humvee. I smiled, though Harper couldn't see it. Sounds nice, I said. You sure you want me there? I don't exactly fit the Dallas luxury scene. She paused. Oh, don't be dramatic. Just, dress simple. They appreciate that. Dress simple. Like I needed to be reminded. That's Harper for you. Compliment and insult, same breath. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The last light of the day hit my medals box through the half-open closet door. I got up, opened it, and looked at the medals lined up inside. Afghanistan. Kuwait. Operations that didn't make the news but saved lives anyway. None of it mattered to Harper. In her world, a woman was only as valuable as her outfit, her address, or the man standing next to her. I pulled out my journal and started writing. I used to do that during deployments, when things got too heavy to say out loud. Harper invited me to Dallas, I wrote. Same voice. Same tone. She's still worried about appearances. I should be too. But maybe it's time she learned that simplicity doesn't mean small. I closed the journal and looked at my reflection in the window. The person staring back wasn't the officer who once commanded 200 sailors. She was just a woman in a gray t-shirt, hair pulled back, no makeup, looking more like a teacher than a veteran. And that was fine. I poured another cup of coffee and turned on the TV. News anchors talked about markets, storms, and people arguing about politics. I let the sound play in the background while my mind wandered back to the phone call. Harper had sounded nervous, which was strange. Maybe she was afraid I'd embarrass her. Or maybe she was just afraid of the reminder that not everyone needs to prove they're doing well. The next morning, I went for a jog along the harbor. My knees complained, but that's what 22 years in combat boots will do. The air smelled like salt and diesel. The Navy ships anchored nearby looked both familiar and distant, like ghosts from a life I still respected but didn't miss. Back home, I made oatmeal, fed the stray cat that hung around my door, and checked my email. Aegis wanted me to review a proposal for a Pacific logistics project. I agreed to look it over later. But as I scrolled through my inbox, one name caught my eye: Harper Lewis. The subject line said, "Dress code for the party." Of course. I opened it. Inside was a paragraph about evening attire, guest lists, and parking instructions. And then, right at the end, just a suggestion: maybe avoid anything too formal or military looking. Keep it soft. You know, approachable. No. I almost laughed out loud. Harper had managed to turn a simple invitation into a subtle warning. Don't look strong. Don't look like yourself. Blend in. I closed the email, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. If she wanted soft, she'd get it. I'd wear something plain. I'd talk less. I'd let them think what they wanted. And I'd watch every reaction, every polite smile, every word that dripped with fake kindness. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was truth. The kind you can only see when people think you're beneath them. I walked to the closet and looked at the two sides that defined my life. Neatly pressed Navy uniforms on the left, worn civilian clothes on the right. My hand hovered between them before settling on an old blue dress I hadn't worn in years. Comfortable, honest, forgettable, perfect. Then I noticed the box of medals again and smiled slightly. I closed the lid, slid it back into the dark, and said out loud to no one, "You and I have done enough talking." The cat meowed outside. I opened the door, gave her a small piece of leftover chicken, and watched her eat. There's something peaceful about small things that don't care who you used to be. The phone buzzed again, another email from Harper. This time a forwarded invitation with fancy gold lettering. The Winters, Lewis engagement celebration. The font screamed money. I read it twice, then set the phone down. I had faced worse things than an expensive dinner. Combat zones didn't care about silk tablecloths. As I cleaned up the kitchen and turned off the light, the hum of the refrigerator filled the room. Outside, ships' horns sounded faintly through the night fog. I poured one last cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the faint glimmer of the harbor. Dallas could wait. I had time to prepare, just not the way my sister expected. The next morning, the San Diego sky was clear and sharp, the kind that makes you believe life is simpler than it really is. I sat with my second cup of coffee, staring at the email Harper sent. The words, "dress simple," stuck like a piece of gum you couldn't scrape off. Harper had a way of wrapping control inside politeness. I clicked open my calendar and added, Dallas, Sophie's engagement party. My cursor hovered over the note for a moment. I typed 3 more words. Act poor, observe. Then I shut the laptop and let out a short laugh. It sounded almost military, like I was planning a small operation, not attending a family event. Later that day, I went for groceries. The cashier recognized me from the base gym and said, "Hey, weren't you in the Navy?" I nodded. "Retired now." She smiled. "You must miss the excitement." I thought about the deployments, the endless heat, the noise of helicopters, and people who didn't come back. "Not even a little," I said. Back home, I opened an old box of letters I'd kept since my deployment years. They smelled like dust and sunburnt paper. On top was one from Harper, dated 2006. I'd almost forgotten it existed. The letter started nicely. "We all miss you. Be safe." Then, 2 paragraphs in, it turned into a sermon. "Camille, this military thing, it's not a life for a woman. You're wasting your best years chasing medals. You should come home, settle down, find someone." I folded the letter slowly. The paper had yellowed around the edges. I'd been in Kabul when that letter came, surrounded by soldiers who hadn't showered in days, sharing 1 pack of instant noodles between 3 people. I remembered reading it under a dim lamp and thinking how far away Harper's world was. It wasn't that she was cruel. She just couldn't imagine worth existing outside of comfort. My phone buzzed. A text from her again. "By the way, bring something nice for Sophie. Maybe jewelry? They'll expect something tasteful." I put the phone face down on the table and shook my head. "They'll expect," she wrote, "always about expectations, never about meaning. When I was younger, I used to care. I wanted her approval like a rookie sailor wants his first medal. But after 2 decades of being ordered around by people who didn't even know my first name, I'd learned the difference between respect and performance. That night, I made myself a simple dinner pasta and canned sauce, nothing fancy. The cat showed up again, brushing against my leg like she owned the place. I dropped a small piece of chicken next to her bowl. "You'd like Harper," I said out loud. "She feeds everyone whether they ask or not." The cat ignored me. Smart creature. I turned on some old rock music, the kind they played in the barracks to drown out boredom. The rhythm filled the apartment as I opened another box, this one full of photos. One showed Harper and me at our dad's retirement ceremony. She was in a bright red dress. I wore my first Navy uniform. Dad's hand was on my shoulder, proud. Harper's smile looked tight, like the dress. She'd told me later, "You look too serious in that uniform. It doesn't suit you." That was Harper's way of saying she hated being outshined. I flipped through more photos until I found one of our mother, holding us both as kids. Mom had died when we were in college. She used to say, "Girls, the world's not kind to women who think for themselves. Be smart, but stay kind." Harper chose smart. I chose strong. Neither of us stayed kind for long. A memory came back, Harper, standing on the front porch the day I left for basic training. She had her arms crossed, a perfect manicure, and said, "You'll regret this." Nobody likes bossy women in uniform. I didn't regret it, not once. My apartment felt smaller that night, like the walls were listening. I opened a beer and stepped out to the balcony. The harbor lights blinked against the dark water, steady and quiet. I wondered if Harper ever looked at the sky without trying to own it. The next day, I called her back. I wasn't going to, but curiosity got the better of me. She picked up on the second ring. "Well, look who's alive," she said. "Harper." You sound tired." "That's my voice," I said. She laughed. Still the same sense of humor. "So, did you get the invitation?" "I did." "Perfect. It'll be good to see you. Oh, and Camille, try to come early. I want you to meet Ethan's parents before the crowd arrives. They're very old school." "Meaning?" "Meaning, they appreciate class. Just be yourself, but maybe less military and more approachable." "Approachable," I repeated. "I'll work on that." She must have sensed the sarcasm because her tone sharpened. "I'm serious. It's an important night for Sophie. Please, don't make it awkward." I wouldn't dream of it. When we hung up, I stared at the phone until the screen went black. My reflection looked tired, but amused. Harper always thought she could script my behavior like one of her open houses, polished, predictable, perfectly framed. I poured more coffee, then opened my laptop to check flights. One-way ticket to Dallas, 3-day trip, economy seat. I didn't need comfort for what I had in mind. As I clicked, confirm, a thought crossed my mind. This wasn't revenge. Not really. I didn't want to humiliate her. I just wanted to know, after all these years, if she'd learned to see beyond her own reflection. Aegis called that afternoon. My supervisor, Major Benson, asked if I could look over a logistics report. He still called me Lieutenant out of habit. "Heading to Texas next week," I said. "Vacation? Family event." He chuckled. "That's worse than deployment. You need backup?" "Not yet," I said. I closed my laptop and started packing a small bag. Nothing fancy. One navy dress, a pair of old flats, a cardigan, and my worn leather wallet. I hesitated at the medals again, then shut the drawer before the thought could finish. The days leading up to the trip moved slowly. I ran, worked, cleaned. Each time Harper texted, her words grew shorter, sharper, a mix of excitement and control. "They're serving champagne. Try not to be late. Bring something nice, but not flashy." It was almost funny. The woman couldn't command a squad, but sure knew how to micromanage an evening. By Friday night, I was ready. My apartment looked exactly as I'd leave it, tidy, quiet, and waiting. The cat jumped on the counter, meowed, then disappeared under the couch. I filled her bowl anyway. The airport the next morning smelled like coffee and impatience. I found my seat by the window, put in earbuds, and closed my eyes. The hum of the engine was comforting, a reminder that even when you're surrounded by people, silence can still be yours. Dallas came into view through a haze of afternoon heat. The sky looked different there, louder somehow, like it was showing off. I grabbed my single suitcase and walked toward the taxi line. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. Four Seasons Dallas, I said. And no, I'm not on vacation. He laughed without asking why. I leaned my head against the window, watching the highways blur by. The city stretched in glass and money, the kind of place that measured worth in square footage. When the car pulled into the hotel driveway, I saw her waiting Harper, in a pale pink dress, perfect hair, perfect smile, the kind of sister who'd never understand quiet strength, but would always try to manage it. She waved like nothing had ever been wrong between us. I stepped out of the taxi and adjusted my bag on my shoulder. Harper reached for a hug, but I could already tell this wasn't a reunion. It was a test I'd already decided to pass in my own way. Harper's perfume hit me before her words did. Sweet, expensive, the kind that announces itself before you do. She hugged me with the enthusiasm of someone greeting a guest she hoped would leave early. You look simple, she said, pulling back to study my dress. Good, I said. You told me to keep it that way. Her smile froze just a second too long. Right, you always did take things literally. The valet took my small suitcase and Harper led me through the lobby. Marble floors, chandeliers, the kind of place that thinks silence should cost extra. She talked the whole way about Sophie's fiancé, the guest list, the menu, how expensive the wine was. I'm glad you came, Camille, she said as the elevator doors closed. It'll mean a lot to Sophie. It means something to me too, I said. Oh? I get to see what kind of family we've become. She blinked, unsure whether it was a compliment or an insult. I didn't help her decide. Upstairs, her suite looked like a catalog spread. Vases of white roses, champagne chilling in silver, everything screaming, look at me. Harper moved around adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. I sat on the edge of a chair, watching her with the calm of someone timing an experiment. She glanced at my shoes. You didn't bring heels? No. Camille, it's a formal dinner. People notice these things. I'm counting on that. She sighed, exasperated. You're impossible. You could have at least borrowed something nice. I didn't want to risk wearing something that doesn't fit, I said. She froze again, recognizing the jab. Our conversations had always been a series of jabs disguised as small talk. While she fussed over decorations, I looked around the room and saw a photo of our parents on the dresser, one of the few she'd kept. Dad was in his navy blues, hand on my shoulder, pride in his eyes. Harper stood beside him, smiling for the camera, her gaze slightly off. Even in photos, she never looked where the real moment was happening. You kept that one, I said. Of course, she replied. It's classic. No, classic. Not meaningful. When Harper left to check on the event coordinator, I opened my small suitcase. Inside were the clothes she'd hate. Plain cardigan, worn flats, a blue dress soft from years of washing. Nothing polished, nothing expensive. I'd packed the way I used to for deployments, light, practical, ready for anything. I hung the dress carefully, smoothing out the wrinkles with my hands. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. In a room full of people pretending honesty would be the loudest thing there. Later that evening, Harper returned with a clipboard and a glass of champagne. So, she said, I went over the seating chart. You'll be at the family table, near Ethan's parents. They're a bit traditional, so maybe skip the Navy talk, okay? I didn't plan to bring it up. Good. And when people ask what you do now, I'll tell them the truth. Camille, she said, setting down the glass. Not everyone understands that kind of work. You mean people who think consultant means unemployed? She gave a polite laugh, the kind that ends too fast. I just don't want them to feel uncomfortable. I smiled. Don't worry. I'll make sure they're very comfortable. She didn't get the joke. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan. The hum reminded me of barracks fans in desert heat, nights when you couldn't sleep because the air felt thick with dust and regret. I thought about the faces I'd seen back then, the ones who didn't get to grow old enough to argue about dresses and wine lists. I wasn't angry at Harper. Pity felt closer to the truth. She'd built her world on surfaces so shiny she couldn't see through them anymore. The next morning, I woke before dawn out of habit. Old soldiers don't need alarm clocks. I brewed coffee in the suite's tiny machine and stepped out to the balcony. Dallas at sunrise looked like it was holding its breath. Glass towers, empty streets, the quiet before the daily performance began. Inside, Harper was still asleep. I left a note on the counter. Went for a walk. Don't worry, I won't embarrass you. The streets were already warming up. I found a diner a few blocks away, neon sign, counter stools, the kind of place Harper would never enter unless the Four Seasons burned down. The waitress called me Han and poured coffee before I asked. The pancakes tasted like the kind of comfort you don't get at home anymore. A man at the counter noticed my navy keychain. You serve? He asked. Did, I said. Now I consult for a defense firm. He nodded. My daughter's Air Force. Never gets the credit she deserves. I smiled. Then she's probably doing it right. When I returned, Harper was on the phone, pacing like a CEO before a press conference. Yes, the flowers must match the table runners, not the drapes, she said. Then she noticed me and covered the mic. We'll leave for the venue at 5. Please, for the love of God, wear something that doesn't look like a field uniform. I'll surprise you, I said. I'm afraid of that. By mid-afternoon, she'd transformed the suite into a staging area, makeup artists, stylists, people fussing with ribbons. I sat quietly in the corner, sipping water, watching the chaos like it was a military drill missing a commander. Harper eventually handed me a silk scarf. Here, maybe this will help. I took it, turned it over in my hands, and laid it back on the table. Too expensive for me. She sighed again, that long-suffering exhale she'd perfected since high school. You've always had to make a point. No, I said. I've just never liked pretending. The look on her face said everything. She didn't understand how those could be different things. At 4:30, I changed into my blue dress. Harper appeared in the doorway, already glowing from foundation and champagne. Her eyes swept over me like a stylist reviewing a mannequin. That's what you're wearing? Yes. You're really committed to this simplicity thing, huh? More than you know. She frowned but didn't argue. Maybe she thought pity would look better than frustration. The hotel elevator was crowded with guests heading to the same event. Harper greeted everyone with practiced charm, all smiles and air kisses. I stayed quiet, nodding politely, holding my small purse like a prop. When the doors opened, we stepped into a hallway glittering with chandeliers and perfume. The hum of conversation echoed ahead, the kind of laughter people rehearse. Harper's stride quickened, energized by attention. I followed behind, steady and calm. I'd learned long ago that walking slowly in a room full of people trying to outshine each other is its own kind of power. At the entrance to the ballroom, she stopped, turned to me, and whispered, "Please, Camille, try to be agreeable tonight." I smiled without showing teeth. You won't even notice I'm there. Her relief was obvious. Mine was quiet. Because that was exactly the point. As we walked inside, I caught sight of Sophie across the room, grown now, elegant, laughing with people who looked like they belonged on magazine covers. She saw me, hesitated, then waved politely. That hesitation said more than words. I waved back. The band tuned up, the lights softened, and the crowd shifted as servers poured the first round of wine. Harper floated ahead, introducing people with the speed of a politician. I stood near the edge of the crowd, letting the noise roll over me. The clinking glasses, the chatter about money, careers, vacations, the language of people who thought success made them kind. My gaze followed Harper as she moved from table to table, glowing under the lights, completely unaware that the person she'd spent years looking down on was standing just a few steps away, quiet, composed, and ready to see how truth behaved when dressed in silk. The sound of glasses clinking mixed with the faint hum of jazz. Everywhere I looked, people shimmered sequins, jewelry, smiles too wide to be sincere. The ballroom glowed gold and white, the kind of luxury that's supposed to smell like success but really just smells like insecurity. Harper loved this environment. It was her stage. She didn't need a microphone, just an audience and a reason to talk. A waiter passed by with champagne. I took one. Not because I wanted to drink, but because standing empty-handed in a room like that made you look vulnerable. I caught Harper's voice across the crowd. "That's my sister, Camille," she said, pointing discreetly toward me. "She's the quiet one in the family. Works in consulting, I think." The "I think" came out sweetly coated with fake humility. The couple she was talking to nodded politely, then turned to inspect me the way people look at a painting they don't understand. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. A few minutes later, Harper brought me over to meet a couple Ethan's parents, the Winters. Charles and Veronica. They looked like they were carved out of money and polished with judgment. Veronica wore diamonds so large they could double as flashlights. Charles had that firm handshake rich men use when they want to prove dominance without saying a word. Camille, these are the Winters, Harper said. They've heard all about you. That line was never a good sign. Veronica's smile didn't move her eyes. So lovely to meet you. Harper says you live simply. I do, I said. It keeps life uncomplicated. How refreshing, she replied, which is code for how unfortunate. Charles leaned in. And you were in the military, correct? Yes, sir. Navy. Oh, how interesting, he said, already bored. Must be quite an adjustment going from that life to what was it again? Consulting. Harper answered for me. She keeps things low-key. Veronica giggled, her bracelets chiming. Low-key is good. Some people get carried away with ambition, don't they? I looked right at her. I suppose it depends on what you consider ambition. She blinked, unsure if that was a compliment or a trap. Well, I'm sure Harper is proud to have such a grounded sister. Proud isn't really her thing, I said. Harper shot me a warning look, but her smile stayed plastered on. Camille loves teasing me, she said to them. She's always had a dry sense of humor. Charles laughed politely. Ah, sarcasm runs in the family. Not exactly, I said. It just runs in my patience. The silence that followed was short but satisfying. Harper cleared her throat and changed the subject to wine pairings. Dinner was announced soon after. I followed them to the table, where place cards sparkled in gold print. My name was misspelled Camille, 1L. Subtle, but deliberate. Harper had always been good at small insults that looked like mistakes. The first course was something French I couldn't pronounce, the kind of food that costs a fortune and leaves you hungry. I picked at it while conversation flowed around me. Everyone talked about vacations, renovations, investments. I nodded when appropriate. At one point, Veronica leaned closer. It must be challenging, managing bills on your own after retiring so early. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but the words stung like vinegar. Harper's eyes flicked toward me, waiting to see how I'd handle it. I manage fine, I said. Oh, of course. Harper tells me you're very independent. That's admirable, though I imagine it gets lonely sometimes. I looked her straight in the eye. Only when I'm around people who confuse loneliness with peace. She blinked, then smiled tightly. You're funny. Not intentionally. Across the table, Charles decided to contribute. You know, my father always believed in helping those who had less. We try to keep that tradition alive. Harper chimed in too quickly. That's one of the things I admire about them. They're incredibly generous. Veronica touched my hand lightly, like she was patting a stray dog. If you ever need anything, dear, we'd be happy to help. Maybe a small allowance every month just to make things easier. Harper's fork froze midair. Sophie stared at her plate. Even Ethan shifted in his seat. The air went thin. I smiled. That's very thoughtful, I said calmly. How much were you thinking? Veronica seemed pleased that I hadn't taken offense. Oh, just a few hundred, maybe 700 a month. Nothing significant. Inutile. 700. Generous. Yes, dear, she said warmly. We believe in sharing our blessings. I set my fork down. That's interesting. $700 is about what I make in 2 hours. Silence. Veronica's hand froze on her wineglass. Charles frowned, confused. Harper looked like she wanted to melt into her chair. I'm sorry, Veronica said. I repeated evenly. It's roughly what I make in 2 hours. I'm a strategic advisor for Aegis Security. We manage defense contracts across the Pacific. I retired from active duty as a lieutenant colonel. My job doesn't come with allowances, it comes with responsibility. The table went completely still. The only sound was a waiter refilling water. Veronica's smile cracked, thin and uncertain. Oh, I see. Well, that's impressive. I nodded. Not really, just quiet work. You wouldn't notice it if you weren't looking. I reached into my purse, pulled out my corporate card, and placed it next to my plate. Dinner's on me. Harper whispered. Camille, that's not necessary. I insist. Consider it a courtesy from the sister you thought needed charity. The waiter glanced nervously at Harper, unsure who was in charge. Harper just sat there, face pale, mouth tight. Across from me, Sophie finally spoke. "Aunt Camille, I didn't know you did that kind of work." I smiled at her. Most people don't, and that's fine. When the waiter took the card, the tension finally broke, replaced by awkward chatter that tried too hard to sound normal. Harper picked up her napkin, folded it neatly, then unfolded it again. Charles cleared his throat. "Well, thank you for your service." "Of course," I said. "It was my job, not my identity." That one hit Harper harder than I expected. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. The rest of the dinner passed like a movie on mute. Conversation stayed safe. Weather, travel, anything that didn't involve pride. Every so often, someone looked at me, then quickly looked away. When dessert came, I barely touched it. I was full enough on irony. As the music picked up again, I stood, adjusted my cardigan, and looked toward Harper. She was pretending to listen to Ethan's father, nodding with a tight smile, her eyes flicking toward me every few seconds. "I'm going to get some air," I said quietly. She started to speak but didn't. I turned and walked toward the exit, past tables full of laughter that sounded like glass about to break. The night air outside hit cool and clean against my face. For the first time in hours, I could breathe. I handed the valet my ticket, but instead of waiting for the car, I walked a few steps toward the street. The rain had started a thin drizzle that turned the streetlights into halos. I could still hear the muffled music from inside, that expensive kind of joy that never lasts. I took a breath and smiled faintly. No yelling, no scene, no grand revenge, just truth, quiet and complete, sitting in the air like the aftershock of a distant explosion. The valet finally pulled up in a yellow taxi instead of my reserved car. I waved it over. The driver rolled down his window. "Need a ride, ma'am?" "Yeah," I said, opening the door and sliding in. "Anywhere that doesn't smell like money." The cab smelled faintly of coffee and pine air freshener. The driver was an older man, gray beard, baseball cap, the kind of guy who'd seen a lot and judged little. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Rough night?" he asked. I looked out the window. Rain blurred the neon lights into streaks of gold and blue. "Not rough," I said. "Just revealing." He chuckled softly. "Family event?" "Something like that." "Those are the worst kind," he said. Everyone smiling while secretly keeping score. That earned a laugh out of me. "You should have been at my table." He smiled, eyes still on the road. "I've driven plenty of people who just left dinners like that. You can always tell quiet people in fancy clothes, staring out windows like they just met the truth for the first time." I leaned back against the seat, letting the hum of the tires drown out the noise in my head. "You've got good instincts." He shrugged. "Comes with mileage." Outside, Dallas glowed like it wanted to prove something. The city felt restless, like it was built on competition instead of concrete. I thought about Harper, still inside that ballroom, probably trying to laugh her way back into control. That's what she did, pretend grace, until the truth faded into background noise. But this time, the truth wasn't going anywhere. When the cab pulled up to the hotel, I paid the fare and added a generous tip. "Take care," the driver said. "You look like someone who just dropped a heavy load." I smiled. I did, but it was never mine to carry. I'm. Inside the lobby, the music from the ballroom was still faintly audible, muffled behind thick walls and thick egos. I walked past the elevator and headed straight for the side door leading to the outdoor terrace. The rain had softened to a mist, cool against my skin. I stood under the awning, watching puddles ripple with each drop. It wasn't anger that sat in my chest, it was clarity. Harper had always seen me through the lens of her insecurities. To her, I'd been the sister who never tried to fit in, who refused to play the game. Tonight, I didn't need to prove her wrong. I'd just stopped pretending she was right. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. One new message blinked on the screen from Sophie. "Aunt Camille, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much Mom and everyone underestimated you. You didn't deserve that." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "You don't have to apologize for their behavior. Just learn from it." No reply came, but that was fine. The silence was enough. I headed up to my room, peeled off the damp cardigan, and changed into an old t-shirt. The clock on the nightstand said 11:58. Somewhere below me, the party was still going, music, laughter, the desperate sound of people trying to prove they were happy. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about my years in uniform. The endless drills, the long deployments, the quiet moments in foreign countries where dignity meant everything because it was the only thing you could control. The military teaches you about silence, the kind that doesn't mean surrender, but strategy. Tonight, that silence had finally found its purpose again. My mind drifted back to a briefing room years ago in Bahrain, the air thick with diesel and sweat. My commanding officer, Captain Ramos, had said something I never forgot. Real power doesn't need an audience, Turner. It just needs control. That line came back now, like a calm echo in a loud place. The next morning, the sun broke through thin clouds, flooding the room with light that felt too honest for a hotel this expensive. I made coffee, the way I always did, black, no sugar, and sat by the window watching the valet staff reset the drive for another day of arrivals. A man in a crisp suit shouted into his phone about stocks. A woman complained about her latte being too warm. The world was already back to pretending. I checked my phone again. 2 missed calls, Harper. No voicemail, just silence. I let the phone ring when she called again, twice. Then, a third time. I finally answered. Camille, she started, her voice tight, controlled. We need to talk. Do we? Yes, she snapped. Last night you embarrassed me. You humiliated the entire family in front of Ethan's parents. I didn't humiliate anyone, I said calmly. I answered a question. You didn't have to flaunt your job like that. Flaunt? You mean mention it? Her silence stretched. You know what I mean. You could have just let them believe what they wanted. I did, for the first half of dinner. Didn't seem to make them any kinder. You've always had this superiority complex. I laughed softly. You mistake composure for superiority. Easy mistake. She exhaled sharply. You're impossible. No, I said. I'm just not for sale. She tried again, this time softer. Look, I didn't mean for things to go that way. They were being polite. They offered me an allowance, Harper. Her pause told me everything. Finally, she said, they meant well. They meant control. She didn't reply. I let the silence hang until it did the talking for me. You know, I said quietly, when we were kids, Mom used to tell us that dignity doesn't shout. You must have thought she was kidding. Don't drag Mom into this, she muttered. I'm not dragging anyone. I'm just reminding you where we both came from. Her tone softened again, brittle around the edges. You always think you're the one who remembers right. No, I said. I just think you forgot what mattered. She sighed, long and tired. I don't want this fight. It's not a fight, Harper. It's a mirror. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Years of chasing perfection had left her so fragile that the truth felt like cruelty. I'll be at the airport by noon, I said. Tell Sophie I wish her the best. Camille. Goodbye, Harper. I hung up before she could wrap her apology in excuses. The room felt lighter after that. I packed slowly, folding clothes with military precision. When I zipped the bag shut, I caught my reflection in the mirror, hair messy, eyes tired, but there was peace there. Not the kind you perform, but the kind that settles when the noise stops mattering. Downstairs, the same bellhop from yesterday helped me with my bag. Heading home already? He asked. Yeah, I said. Mission accomplished. He laughed. Business or family? Hard to tell the difference sometimes. The taxi ride to the airport was quiet. No music, no conversation. Just the steady rhythm of tires on asphalt. As we merged onto the freeway, I saw the skyline fading in the rearview mirror, Harper's city of appearances shrinking into a blur. For a moment, I thought about how things might have gone differently. Maybe if Harper had ever seen me as an equal. Maybe if she'd learned to stop measuring love by social status. But maybe doesn't change much. Life teaches you through exposure, not explanation. At the terminal, I paid the driver and stepped out into the warm, windy air. Planes roared overhead, leaving trails that disappeared faster than they were noticed. I stood there a second longer, feeling the weight of the night before fade into distance. Inside, the security line moved slowly. A TSA agent glanced at my military ID and nodded. Thank you for your service, ma'am. I smiled. You're welcome. Still serving, just in quieter ways. As I walked through the checkpoint, I caught a glimpse of my reflection again. Same woman, different calm. I didn't need to win anything last night. I'd already won by staying still while everyone else performed. And somewhere in that quiet victory, I realized something else. Silence isn't the absence of power. It's the proof you've mastered it. The flight back to San Diego was quiet. I sat near the window, watching clouds drift like lazy ghosts. A flight attendant asked if I wanted a drink. I asked for black coffee, out of habit more than need. When it arrived, I stared at the steam curling up and thought about how strange it was that peace could feel so heavy and light at the same time. A young woman sat next to me, maybe late 20s, typing on a laptop covered with stickers that screamed ambition, Harvard alum, tech conference, some motivational quote about hustle. She glanced at my worn backpack and said, "Heading home from work?" "Something like that," I said. She smiled. "I'm on my way to a startup retreat, supposed to be life-changing. Hope it changes in the right direction," I said. She laughed politely, not sure if I was joking. Then she looked at my wrist. "That's a Navy band, right?" I nodded. My dad was a Marine. He said the Navy people always looked too calm. Drove him crazy. "Calm's how you survive," I said. She studied me for a second, probably trying to guess what kind of life I'd had. But she didn't ask more, which I appreciated. Some silences don't need to be filled. When we landed, the warm California air felt like a reset button. I stepped outside the terminal, grabbed a cab, and leaned back as the driver merged into traffic. The radio played soft country music, the kind that makes long roads feel shorter. The driver, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, glanced at me through the mirror. "Long trip? Too short for what it fixed," I said. He smiled. "That's a good one. You a writer or something?" "Retired Navy," I said. "Now I fix things no one wants to admit are broken." He nodded, impressed, but not surprised. "You sound like my mom. Tough lady. Never complained, even when we had nothing. Then she was probably richer than most." He laughed. "Yeah, she said something like that too. Money's loud, dignity's quiet." That made me turn my head. She was right. Ein head. We drove the rest of the way in silence. Outside, the ocean shimmered on the horizon, the water catching sunlight like it had a secret to keep. I rolled down the window and let the air wash through, cool and clean. When we reached my building, the driver helped me with my bag. "Have a good one, ma'am," he said. "You too," I replied. And for a moment, I wanted to tell him his mother had probably been the kind of woman who would have understood me instantly. The apartment was just as I'd left it, quiet, organized, and honest. I dropped my bag, fed the stray cat waiting by the door, and brewed fresh coffee. The smell filled the room like an old friend coming home. My phone buzzed. One message. "Harper, you left before I could talk to you. I didn't mean to offend you. Things just got out of hand." I didn't answer right away. I sat with the phone in my hand, sipping coffee, letting the words settle. "Didn't mean to offend" was her way of saying she regretted getting caught, not what she'd done. I typed, "It's fine. I'm home." Then I put the phone face down on the table. Outside, the city was just waking up. Joggers on the boardwalk, kids heading to school, the distant hum of life moving on. I stood by the window, watching a woman across the street struggle with her stroller and coffee cup. A man stepped forward to help. She laughed, said something I couldn't hear, and the two walked off together. Small acts of decency. No audience, no credit, just quiet grace. Later that afternoon, I went for a run along the harbor. My knees complained, as usual, but I pushed through. The rhythm of my steps matched the sound of waves slapping against the docks. Every few yards, I caught the scent of salt, diesel, and seaweed, the smell of a world that never pretends to be more than it is. I passed by a group of young sailors, fresh out of boot camp. They were laughing, shoulders loose, the way people look before life teaches them restraint. One of them called out, "Ma'am, were you in the Navy?" I nodded. "Still am, in the ways that matter." He grinned. "Respect." I kept running. The air burned in my lungs, but it felt clean. When I got back home, another message was waiting. This one wasn't from Harper, it was from Sophie. "Mom's upset. She said she didn't mean it the way it sounded. I think she's embarrassed. I am too. I've been thinking a lot since that dinner. I replied, thinking's good. That's how change starts. A minute later, another ping. You were right. We confuse worth with wealth. I don't want to be like that. I smiled at the screen, then typed, then you won't be. That was the difference between Sophie and Harper. One defended the illusion. The other was learning to live without it. The next morning, I woke early again. Habit never leaves. I sat with my coffee and a notepad, the one I use for work, and started writing thoughts that weren't for any report. Dignity isn't a gift. It's a choice. And some people can't handle that because they're addicted to validation. I underlined it twice. I thought about Harper again, not with anger, just perspective. We'd grown up in the same house, with the same lessons, but we'd heard them differently. She thought success meant being admired. I thought it meant being steady. In a way, the Navy and Harper had taught me the same rule. People will always underestimate quiet strength. The difference is, in the Navy, they eventually learned to respect it. Harper never did. The cat jumped onto the table, nudging my pen. I scratched her behind the ears. You don't care about family drama, do you? She meowed, unimpressed. I envied her simplicity. The day stretched into evening, the sky burning orange over the harbor. I made dinner, turned on the radio, and listened to an old Sinatra song drifting through static. Somewhere in the middle, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail. Harper's voice. Strained, but careful. Camille, I know you probably don't want to talk, but I wanted to say thank you for coming. I know I can be difficult. Sophie's been quiet all day. I think she's finally seeing what I couldn't. Maybe that's because of you. Anyway, I hope you're okay. For the first time in years, her voice didn't sound polished. It sounded real, raw even. I didn't call her back. Some words don't need an answer. They just need to sit in the air until they mean something. I stepped onto the balcony, feeling the cool wind off the Pacific. The city lights flickered like steady beacons, ships coming in slow, their horns echoing across the bay. I closed my eyes and thought about everything. The dinner, the silence, the look in Harper's eyes when the truth finally hit her. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't victory. It was something purer, quieter. The kind of truth that doesn't need to be repeated to be remembered. I took a long breath, letting the air fill my chest. The sound of the waves rose and fell like the rhythm of something ancient, something that didn't need anyone's approval to exist. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a soldier or a sister or a symbol of anything. I just felt human, flawed, steady, and enough. And somewhere between the hum of the city and the whisper of the sea, I realized that maybe the best kind of revenge isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about living so clearly that their judgment fades into background noise. I turned off the balcony light, went inside, and poured another cup of coffee. It tasted exactly the way I liked it, strong, simple, and honest. The morning sun sliced through the blinds, landing on the small kitchen table where my coffee waited. The air smelled like salt and roasted beans, calm and steady. I scrolled through the news on my phone without really reading anything, just letting my eyes drift. Then came the sound of another message, Harper again. I've been thinking about what happened. Sophie's really upset. Maybe we could talk? No pressure. Mars. No pressure, her favorite lie. Still, something in her tone, even through text, felt less defensive. I set the phone down without replying and looked out the window. Across the street, an older man was helping his wife load groceries into the trunk of a dented sedan. The scene was ordinary, but something about it hit me harder than it should have. That was love without performance. No need to prove anything. I poured another cup of coffee, leaned against the counter, and exhaled. Pride doesn't vanish in one night. It lingers like smoke after a fire. Harper would be wrestling with the embarrassment, the loss of control. I knew her patterns too well, first denial, then rationalization, then a half-hearted apology wrapped in self-defense. Still, people can surprise you. By mid-afternoon, I got another text, this time from Sophie. Mom wants to come see you. She said she owes you an apology. I think she means it. It's not about apology. I typed back. It's about understanding. She replied, then maybe she's finally ready. I didn't respond. There's no manual for forgiveness. It happens the way tides shift, slow, quiet, and inevitable. Later that day, I went down to the marina. The boats were rocking gently, ropes creaking against the docks. A couple of veterans were fishing off the pier, one of them wearing a faded cap that said USS Nimitz. I nodded as I passed, and he raised his coffee in silent acknowledgement. There's a language among people who've served, it's mostly quiet, made of respect instead of words. I sat on a bench and watched the horizon, trying not to think but failing. You spend enough time in the military, and reflection becomes another kind of mission, relentless and exacting. My thoughts drifted to Harper again, to that dinner, to the frozen smile on her face when I told the truth. Some people think silence is weakness, but I'd learned that silence is often the only thing that forces others to hear themselves. When I got home, there was a knock on the door. Not a neighbor's knock, too hesitant for that. I opened it, and there she was. Harper. No perfect makeup, no silk dress, just jeans and a plain sweater. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Hi," she said finally. "Hi." She held a small paper bag in her hands, like she needed something to hold to keep from shaking. "I brought muffins. Blueberry." I didn't know what else to bring. "Coffee's fresh," I said, stepping aside. "That'll go fine with it." She walked in slowly, her eyes tracing the apartment. I could see the moment she noticed how small it was, how clean, how lived in. "It's cozy," she said carefully. "That's what I like about it." She set the bag on the table and sat down. Her posture was stiff, the kind of stiffness that comes from pride trying to pretend it's humility. I poured 2 cups of coffee and joined her. For a minute we just sat there in silence. Then she said quietly, "I don't know how to start this." "Try the truth," I said. "It usually works." Her eyes dropped to her cup. "That night, I wanted everything to go perfectly. I wanted you there, but I also didn't want you to make things uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable for who?" "For me," she admitted. "For all of us, really. I wanted to show Ethan's family that we were polished, that we had it together." I didn't realize how that sounded until it was too late. I stirred my coffee, waiting. "When Veronica offered you money, I wanted to crawl under the table," she said, voice trembling. I should have said something, but I froze. "And then you, God, Camille, you were so calm. I couldn't decide if I wanted to hug you or strangle you." "Story of our childhood," I said, half smiling. She laughed softly, then sighed. "You know, I always thought you were trying to prove something. Joining the Navy, staying single, living simple. I thought you were rebelling against me, against what I valued. But that's not it, is it?" "No," I said. "I just wanted peace. You wanted validation. We both chased what we thought we needed." She nodded slowly, eyes wet but steady. "You were right about me. I measure everything success, respect, love. I don't even know why anymore. Maybe because I've always been scared of being ordinary." I leaned back, studying her. "Ordinary isn't failure, Harper. It's where people find themselves when they stop performing." She swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can stop performing. Then at least pick a smaller stage." That earned a genuine laugh, shaky but real. We sat in silence again, sipping coffee. The kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. Outside, I could hear kids laughing, a car starting, waves hitting the shore. Life kept going, unbothered by our drama. After a while, Harper looked around the room again. "You know, I think I get it now. You like small spaces because they don't echo." I smiled. "Something like that." She hesitated before asking, "Do you forgive me?" I thought about that word, how people use it like a clean slate. Forgiveness isn't erasure, it's recognition. "I don't need to," I said. "You're already forgiving yourself, and that's the hard part." Her shoulders relaxed a little, like something inside her finally unclenched. "You always make things sound simpler than they are." "They are simple," I said. "People just complicate them to avoid admitting they were wrong." She reached across the table and touched my hand lightly. "You know, for someone who claims she doesn't care about proving a point, you're very good at winning arguments." I smiled. Occupational hazard. When she stood to leave, she looked lighter, smaller in a way that wasn't weakness, but release. She hugged me awkward, hesitant, but sincere. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You always were," I replied. "You just didn't know how to show it." She laughed through her tears. "Still bossy. Still May." After she left, I stood by the window, watching her car pull away. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, painting long streaks of gold across the wet pavement. I could still smell the blueberry muffins cooling on the table. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like balance. The kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand applause. Just the quiet settling of things finally aligning where they belong. I looked around the apartment, the worn couch, the faded curtains, the framed photo of Mom on the shelf. She'd be proud, I thought. Not because I'd won, but because I'd remembered. I sat back down, poured another cup of coffee, and let the room breathe. The world outside was still moving, still imperfect, still loud. But inside, there was calm, the kind that comes not from victory, but from finally choosing not to fight battles that don't deserve you. And somewhere in that calm, I realized that revenge had never been the point. It was just a doorway to something better: dignity, rediscovered, love unperformed, and a sister learning how to see me without her own reflection in the way. The next few weeks slipped by quietly, like the tide creeping back after a storm. Harper didn't call, but that was fine. I wasn't expecting her to. People like her needed time to sit with discomfort before it turned into growth. And for once, I didn't feel the need to rush her along. One Saturday morning, the doorbell rang just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee. The cat jumped off the counter, tail flicking like a small alarm. When I opened the door, I froze for half a second. Sophie stood there, holding a small bouquet of daisies and wearing jeans, sneakers, and a beige sweater that looked a size too big. No makeup, no jewelry. Just a nervous smile that made her look younger than I remembered. "Hi, Aunt Camille," she said softly. "I hope this isn't a bad time." "It never is for coffee," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." "Aw." She hesitated at the door like she was entering a museum. Her eyes moving over the small apartment, the books stacked neatly on the table, the framed photo of my Navy crew, the chipped coffee mugs by the sink. "It's really cozy," she said, almost surprised. "That's my favorite thing about it." She placed the flowers on the counter, fidgeting with the ribbon. "I wanted to apologize," she said, voice trembling, "for that night, for what Mom and the Winters said, and for not saying anything. I poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. "You don't owe me an apology, Sophie. You owe yourself understanding." She sat down at the table, wrapping her hands around the mug. "I grew up thinking money made people respectable. That's what Mom always said. If you want to be respected, you need to look successful." "That's what she believes," I said. "It's not what's true." "I know that now," she said. "After that dinner, I felt sick. The way they talked to you, it was wrong. You didn't even get angry. You just said what you had to. And it made everyone look so small." I smiled faintly. Anger gives people power they didn't earn. Silence makes them see it themselves. She nodded slowly, eyes wet. "I want to be better than that. I don't want to turn into them." "Then start small," I said. "Listen more than you speak. Treat people the same whether they can help you or not. That's how you start changing the story." Sophie smiled through her tears. "I think Mom's trying too. She's been different lately, quieter. She even told Dad that maybe they should do fewer parties." "That's progress," I said. "One less chandelier, one more conscience." That made her laugh, a real laugh, unpolished and warm. She looked around again, taking in the space as if trying to memorize it. "I see why Mom never really got you. You're comfortable here, and she's always chasing something she can't catch." "She thinks peace is a prize," I said. "She doesn't realize it's a choice." Sophie exhaled, nodding. "You know, when I was little, I used to tell people my aunt was in the Navy. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. You didn't care about dresses or gossip. You were brave." "I was just doing my job," I said. "No," she insisted. "You were doing what scared other people." Her words sat heavier than she probably intended. For a moment, I saw her not as Harper's daughter but as her own person, a woman still figuring out where pride ended and integrity began. We talked for over an hour. About her engagement, about how she didn't want her wedding to be another performance, about how she wanted to build something real. She used that word a lot, real. I liked that. At one point she said quietly, "Mom doesn't know I came. She'll probably freak out." "She won't," I said. "And if she does, that's just guilt pretending to be authority." Sophie smiled, then looked serious again. She told me she's proud of you now. She said you handled that dinner with more class than she's ever seen. Then maybe she finally understands what class actually looks like. Before leaving, Sophie stood by the door, flowers still on the counter. Can I come visit again sometime? You don't have to ask, I said. This isn't a palace. No invitations required. Ask me. She laughed again and hugged me tight, like someone holding on to a truth they didn't want to forget. When she left, the apartment felt both full and quiet, like the echo of something that had finally settled. I looked at the daisies on the counter. They were simple, cheerful, stubborn in their own way. I found a small vase, filled it with water, and placed it by the window. The sunlight hit the petals just right, and for the first time in a while, the room didn't just feel peaceful, it felt alive. That evening, Harper called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said to pick up. I heard Sophie came by, she said. Her tone wasn't sharp, just tired. Human. She did. I didn't tell her to. She just went. She said it helped. It did, I said simply. There was a pause. Then she said, I wanted to thank you. Not for embarrassing me, God knows that part stung, but for making me see what I'd become. I thought I was teaching Sophie how to succeed. Turns out I was teaching her how to perform. Better to realize now than 20 years from now, I said. She let out a shaky laugh. You always find a way to make things sound so simple. They usually are, I said. The problem is, simple doesn't sell well. For the first time since I could remember, her laugh wasn't defensive. It was soft, real. You know, she said, I've been thinking of visiting you next month. Maybe stay a weekend. No parties, no fancy dinners, just you and me. I smiled. We'll see if you can handle my cooking. I'll take the risk. After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching the last light fade over the water. The sky turned orange, then pink, then blue. The kind of quiet beauty you don't post pictures of because it loses meaning once you do. For years, Harper and I had lived like opposite ends of a compass, always pointing away from each other, convinced we knew the right direction. But now, for the first time, it felt like maybe we were both just learning to stop running. The next morning, I found myself smiling for no reason. I made coffee, fed the cat, and glanced at the daisies by the window. They'd opened wider overnight. Maybe peace doesn't need grand gestures or closure. Maybe it's just this two sisters, finally learning that forgiveness isn't a performance either. I picked up my mug, took a slow sip, and looked out at the quiet harbor, where sunlight danced on the waves like it had nowhere better to be. The days began to find a rhythm again. Coffee at dawn, jog by the harbor, a few hours consulting for Aegis, and evenings spent watching the light fade across the Pacific. The silence in my apartment didn't feel empty anymore, it felt earned. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Harper. We're driving down this weekend. Sophie wants to visit. Don't panic, I'm not bringing the Winters. I smiled at that last part. She still couldn't resist a small jab, but it was softened now, more like a sibling teasing than a shot fired. I texted back, Fine, bring coffee. I'm running low. That Saturday, the doorbell rang right on time. Harper stood there holding a paper tray with 3 lattes and a grocery bag. Sophie was beside her, carrying what looked like a pie. Harper's hair was pulled into a ponytail, no jewelry, just a sweatshirt that said, Navy Mom, probably something she'd bought in a moment of irony. Well, I said, opening the door wider, you look almost normal. She smirked. Don't push it. The apartment filled with their voices and the smell of warm coffee. Sophie set the pie on the table while Harper looked around, like she was seeing the place for the first time. It's smaller than I imagined, she said, but peaceful. Peace takes up less space than pride, I said. She rolled her eyes. You can't even let me compliment you without turning it into a quote. Force of habit, I said, sipping my coffee. We sat together at the table, the same one where I'd shared muffins with her weeks before. Sophie cut the pie while Harper started talking, fast as usual but without the sharp edges. Things have been different since that dinner, she said. Ethan's parents are still a bit stiff, but Sophie and I are closer. I've been trying to be less curated, I guess. That's a good word for you, I said. She smirked. Careful, I'm trying to be vulnerable here. Sophie laughed. She's actually been doing better. Fewer charity galas, more family dinners. She even cooked last week. I raised an eyebrow. Voluntarily? Harper groaned. It was edible. That's enough. The conversation rolled easily from there. We talked about Harper's work, Sophie's wedding plans, and how Harper's husband had started donating anonymously instead of attaching his name to every event. It was the first time in years that I heard them talk about life without trying to impress anyone. After lunch, Sophie went out to pick up groceries for dinner, leaving Harper and me alone. She looked at me, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. You know, I used to think you hated me, she said quietly. Not just disapproved of me, but actually hated me. I never hated you, Harper. I hated what you thought love had to look like. She nodded slowly. I guess I thought if people admired us, it meant we were doing something right. But that night when you said simplicity isn't lack, I couldn't stop hearing it. It got stuck in my head. I realized I'd spent years mistaking noise for value. I took a sip of coffee and said, noise sells better. It fills the gaps when people don't know what peace sounds like. She smiled faintly. You should have been a writer instead of a soldier. Soldiers deal with reality. Writers make it pretty. She laughed. Fair enough. There was a pause before she said, I told Sophie about Dad's medals, the ones you kept. She didn't know much about him. Most people didn't. He believed in showing up, not showing off. Sounds like someone else I know, she said. That caught me off guard. Harper rarely gave out compliments without patting them in sarcasm. But this time, there was no patting, just honesty. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the window, catching on the daisies Sophie had brought weeks ago. They were fading, but still standing tall. Harper noticed them too. She brought those, didn't she? Yeah, I said. Didn't think she'd remember flowers, but she did. She's her mother's daughter, Harper said, smiling softly. Stubborn, sentimental, always trying to do the right thing too late. Better late than never. We fell quiet again, the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward anymore. Then Harper reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. What's this? I asked. An invitation, she said, to Sophie's wedding. It's gonna be small this time. Backyard, no photographers, no designer nonsense, just family and friends. She wants you to walk her down the aisle. He blinked. That's not really my place. It is now, Harper said. She says she wants the person who taught her strength, not status, to walk beside her. For once, I didn't have a ready response. My throat tightened a little. She's sure about that? Harper smiled. I tried to talk her out of it. She didn't listen. Wonder where she gets that from. I folded the envelope and set it on the table. Tell her I'm honored. Harper nodded, her eyes glossy. You should tell her yourself. When Sophie returned, she found us sitting quietly, half smiling in that way people do when something unspoken has finally been said. Dinner that night was simple pasta, salad, cheap wine. We ate on mismatched plates, laughed too loudly, and ignored the mess. When Harper spilled sauce on her sweatshirt, she just laughed and said, Guess that's karma. Sophie grinned. Mom, you've got to stop calling everything karma. Sometimes it's just bad aim. I sat back, watching them, feeling something I hadn't in years, contentment, clean and unforced. After dinner, we walked down to the harbor. The air was cool, the sky streaked with pink and silver. Harper linked her arm through mine, something she hadn't done since we were teenagers. Remember when we used to walk like this after Dad's barbecues? She said. I remember you always complained about the bugs, I said. I still hate bugs, she laughed. But this is nice. We walked in silence for a while, listening to the waves slap against the pier. Sophie walked ahead, taking pictures of the water, her laughter drifting back toward us. You did good with her, I said quietly. Harper smiled. No, you did. We stayed until the sky went dark and the harbor lights came on, blinking across the water like stars that had fallen asleep near the shore. When we finally headed back, Harper turned to me and said, You know, I used to think you got lucky that the Navy made you strong, but now I think you were strong long before that. I shrugged. Strength's overrated. Peace is harder. She nodded, thoughtful. Then maybe I'm finally learning the harder thing. When we reached the apartment, Sophie hugged me again, tight and warm. See you soon, Aunt Camille, she said. And next time, you're not cooking alone. Deal, I said. After they left, the apartment felt quiet again, but not empty. I stood by the window, watching their car pull away, headlights fading down the street. For the first time in my life, I realized the family I thought I'd lost hadn't disappeared, they just needed to grow up enough to meet me halfway. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of victory worth having. Months passed, and the world went on turning, people rushing, buying, showing, forgetting. I stayed steady. My days had a rhythm now that no one could buy. Morning coffee, walks by the harbor, quiet work in my small home office, and evenings that ended without noise. Sophie's wedding came on a mild spring day. The sky was the kind of blue that looks honest, no haze, no drama, just clear. Her backyard had been transformed with white chairs, simple flowers, and a single arch made of driftwood. It was beautiful in a way that felt human, not staged. When I arrived, Harper greeted me at the gate. No designer dress this time, just a pale linen gown and a smile that didn't try too hard. "You made it," she said. "I said I would." She looked around proudly. "Small, right? Just family and close friends. No photographers, no media people, no sponsors." "Imagine that," I said, and she laughed. Sophie came out of the house in her wedding dress. Simple ivory fabric, no jewels, no train. She looked radiant in the way people do when they stop trying to impress anyone. She hugged me tightly, her eyes shining. "You ready?" she whispered. I nodded. Always. When the music started, she slipped her arm through mine. We walked slowly down the short aisle together. The crowd rose, not with applause, but with that quiet respect people give when something feels genuine. Halfway down, Sophie whispered, "Mom's crying already." "Then we did something right," I said. When we reached the arch, I handed her over to Ethan and stepped back, finding a seat in the second row. Harper met my eyes from across the aisle and smiled through her tears. For once, it didn't look like guilt or pride. It looked like gratitude. The ceremony was short. No speeches about money, no empty toasts about perfection, just vows about honesty, kindness, and partnership. When it ended, the applause was soft but full. Sophie and Ethan kissed, and the guests threw petals that floated down like confetti made of forgiveness. Later, during the reception, Harper sat beside me under a canopy of string lights. She handed me a glass of wine. "You know," she said, "I used to think simple weddings were for people who couldn't afford better. Turns out, they're for people who finally understand what matters." "Welcome to the club," I said. She laughed. "You always get the last word." "Hass. That's because I wait until it's worth saying." We sat there for a while, watching Sophie and Ethan dance barefoot on the grass. The music was soft, the kind you hum without realizing it. Guests talked quietly, kids chased fireflies, and everything felt right. Harper leaned back in her chair. "I talked to Dad in my head last night," she said suddenly. "Told him I was sorry for spending so long trying to outshine everyone. I think he'd be proud of you, and maybe proud of me for finally listening." I nodded. "He'd be proud that we finally stopped competing." She smiled, eyes glistening. "You always make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," I said. "It's just possible." After the party, I stayed to help clean up. Harper tried to take a broom from me, and we ended up laughing like kids again, sweeping petals and dirt off the patio. "You're doing it wrong," I said. "I'm doing it my way," she replied. "Which is still wrong," I said. We both laughed so hard that even Sophie came out to see what was happening. For a moment, we weren't a family trying to fix old wounds, we were just people sharing a night that didn't need explanations. When everything was packed away, I walked to the edge of the yard. The moon hung low over the water, calm and steady. Harper joined me, crossing her arms against the cool air. "Do you ever miss the Navy?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said, "but not the noise. I miss the clarity. Out there, you always knew what the mission was. Here, people invent battles that don't even exist." "I used to live like that," she said. "Every day was a performance, and the crazy part is I thought that meant I was winning." "Winning what?" She exhaled slowly. "I have no idea." We stood there in silence, listening to the waves. "I'm glad you showed me who I was that night," she said quietly. "It hurt, but I needed it." "Truth usually hurts before it heals," I said. "That's how you know it's real." The next morning, as I packed to leave, Harper handed me a small box. "Before you go," she said. Inside was a silver compass, old, worn, and familiar. Dad's? I asked. She nodded. I found it in Mom's old trunk. Thought you should have it. You were always the one who knew where you were going. I closed the box and smiled. You know, he gave me one just like this when I left for basic training. Said, keep your bearings, no matter how loud the world gets. And Fru, looks like you did. Eventually, I said. On the drive home, the compass sat on the passenger seat beside me. The needle stayed steady, even as the road curved through hills and fog. I kept glancing at it, half expecting it to start spinning just to test me. But it didn't. Back in San Diego, life returned to its quiet rhythm. I worked, ran, fed the cat, and spent evenings watching the sky fade into the sea. Harper and I talked once a week now. Not the awkward, polite kind of conversations we used to have, but real ones. About family, about work, about life. She'd started volunteering at a local shelter, and she said it made her feel more grounded than any gala ever did. Sophie sent pictures from her honeymoon. No Paris, no five-star resorts. Just a road trip through small towns, sunsets, and roadside diners. In one of them, she was wearing a t-shirt that said peace over perfection. I laughed when I saw it. She got it. One night, as I sat by the window writing in my journal, I thought about all the noise that had once surrounded me. The shouting, the comparisons, the performances. It had all faded now, leaving behind something rare, clarity. I wrote, real power isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It listens, it observes, and it forgives without forgetting. I tuned in, then I closed the journal and looked around my little apartment, the place that once felt small but now felt like the center of everything that mattered. The medals in the closet stayed where they belonged, silent witnesses to a life that didn't need to be flaunted. I didn't need trophies to feel accomplished. I had something better peace that didn't depend on applause. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the balcony. Down below, the city lights shimmered against the dark water, a reflection of how things can glow even after they've been through storms. The compass sat on the table beside me, its needle pointing true north, steady and unshaken. I traced its edge with my finger and whispered, almost to myself, money fades, dignity doesn't. And somewhere between the ocean breeze and the hum of distant traffic, I knew I'd finally come home not just to a place, but to myself.